Hello and welcome to the next presentation from the Made With Defold Jam 2025. This time we have the presentation on updates on Defold and a Q&A with Bjorn Ritzl.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Pavel, for yet again organizing this great game jam. It's really grown. Don't be shy. You should actually, you're doing a great job. And this is one of the highlights of the year. So thank you for organizing it. And thank you, Asate, for creating a lot of new YouTube tutorials. It's great. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about 4 different things, or 3, and we have a Q&A at the end. So first of all, there's a 5-year anniversary that we've forgotten a bit. Then we're going to take a look at what's happened since the last game jam, and then do a bit of a look ahead on a very high level. So first of all, in May, the Defold Foundation turned 5 years, and it just passed by. We were probably writing code or something and really forgot to celebrate. But on the 19th of May 2020, me and Matthias started the foundation, and at that point we had quit our jobs at King, and we got all of the stuff moved and the source code and the trademarks, and 5 years ago. Feels pretty crazy to have been working on our own, self-funded, aside from the small initial donation from King. But yeah, that's an achievement, and we forgot to celebrate, but we'll follow up with a couple of blog posts probably, and to dig more deeply into some of the things that have happened in these 5 years. I'm going to do a quick retrospective and highlight a few things at least. So it started in May, and just after the announcement, Heroic Labs joined as our first corporate partner. And if you don't know, they have a couple of backend services for games. They have a lot of large AAA titles using their services. Like you can host it on your own, or you can use their cloud hosting as well. And they have the Nakama backend solution and Satori, which we have default integrations for. It's all Lua based. You can also write your game logic on the backend in Lua, so it fits very well with Defold. And they've been with us since the beginning. And actually at Gamescom, the Heroic Lab guys also had an anniversary. They celebrated 10 years at Gamescom and threw a nice party. So on the picture you see Chris cutting the cake, so one of the founders of Heroic Lab. So thank you so much, guys, for staying with us and sponsoring development every month for 5 years. That's great. Launched the Nintendo Switch support. So that was the first console to hit Defold. Part of the work was obviously done while at King, but now it was our first major release. We did the release together with a game studio. They released Interrogation, a cool detective game or police game. It's only for approved developers, and that's still the case, obviously. But at that time, we also charged a small fee for access. And in August of the same year, we welcome Melsoft, now Moon Active, as a corporate partner. They have a game called Family Island, a resource management game, very well received by players, super popular, 50 million downloads on Google Play, and I have no idea how many players they have on Apple, but probably more. And they're funding a lot of development work, and they've done so since 2020. It's great that they believe in us and that you can build such a successful game in Defold. Super happy to have them as a partner. And in February next year, we signed with Rive. So they came in with their vector animation tool, and we did cool integration. And we've been working with the guys on and off in various constellations over the years. So they funded a bunch of development work at the time. Now we're working with them together with an undisclosed partner. And great guys and a great tool that I think will really shake up the games industry. Same year, in November, we got a large donation from OP Games. That was really helpful when we were small and, starting and just finding our ground and trying to navigate this world of being independent. And in November 2022, we decided that we should no longer charge our user for console access. And then at that point, it was only Nintendo Switch access that we released for free, so you didn't have to pay any fee. But you still had to be an approved developer, of course. And then we had the PlayStation support coming in June 2023. We released a game with Ben James, so the Trigger Dungeon game was released on PS4. And then we had PS5 added the next year. Also free, of course, for approved developers. And in November of the same year, we signed with Pokey. Pokey, who most of you probably are familiar with, they have a very popular platform for web games at pokey.com. We have a lot of users, probably some in the stream and others on the forum and on Discord, who are very successful releasing cool web-based games on Pokey. If you're not familiar with Pokey, you should really go back and watch the interview we did with, or Pavel did with Dennis in the last Made With Defold Jam. Dennis, one of the community managers and developer relations people from Pokey, did a good presentation on Pokey and what you can expect and what kind of platform it is. And it's a great place for developers. And the web in general, I'd say, is a great place for developers to find an audience. So much more accessible for small studios to release games on the web. And yeah, Pokey's been with us and they're funding quite a bit of work that we do. So thank you, Pokey. Then we had a new studio signing, Denda Games, the Dutch game dev and porting studio, and they have a different kind of target audience. They're doing a lot of puzzle and word games for news and media, like Think Wordle, but other things for a more of a mature newspaper audience. They also do porting of games, so they ported Dan the Man, which is a classical game on mobile, to the web. And they're really ramping up and going all in on Defold. So we're happy to have them as a partner. And one highlight feature-wise, I'd say, is the expanded editor scripts. We've wanted to open up the editor for a long time, and we used to have editor scripts to hook into like the build pipeline and that sort of thing. But now with the editor scripts for UI, you can build more advanced tools inside of Defold. There's lots of stuff we can still do, but I think this was one of those milestones that's worth mentioning. So it's a Lua API for building UIs in Defold, where you can have your own custom tools. And we actually migrated all of the bundle dialogue. So if you open a bundle dialogue in Defold now, it's actually built using this API in Lua. And we also used it for the Pokey bundle dialogue, for instance. So a lot has happened, and we started with me and Matthias, and now we're 6 full-time developers working on Defold and 2 contractors working part-time as well. And it's all funded by current partners, such as those you see here, and some past partners as well. The Mario question mark kind of thing there, that's an undisclosed, very well-known partner that we hope to be able to talk more about later this year. You've all heard of the company. All right, so that's a recap. As always, we try to do a monthly release. We go between 10 and 12 releases per year. And last year, or in the time period between these 2 game jams, there were 11 releases. And a whole bunch of issues closed, and some breaking changes, some worse than others. But in general, we try to minimize those, as you well know. And I was so happy when I saw Atsiom post that he opened like a 4-year-old project, and it basically just worked out of the box. And then Ben James, Ben really wins here by saying that he opened a 9-year-old project and it actually built and ran. That's like totally crazy. We did one of those experiments, like opening one of the first projects created by the original authors of Defold, and it's actually still ran. I'm not sure if it will run now, but it did then. So I think that's really cool, and that's something we try to avoid breaking changes. I think the most intrusive one is the scale along Z change that we are doing in the current release. So please pay attention to the release notes, but overall we should just keep chugging along with monthly releases and not make too much of a mess in your projects. And let me know if we do. Some focus areas. So we did like a survey just around the last game jam and asked about like things developers liked and disliked with Defold. And of course, the 3D support was one of the things that a lot of developers really like to see us improve on. There was probably like 30 or 40 suggested improvement areas, and that's impossible for such a small team to cover, and we can't all focus on 3D support either, but we did at least manage to squeeze in some nice improvements since last year. So and we also see now that more developers are building games, like Dimitri with Merge Drill Masters and his previous boxing game and so on, and Atsiom is doing some crazy car physics thing that I really hope to see turn into a nice racing game of some kind. So I'm super excited to see more 3D content, and also want to clarify that we're not adding 3D support that would compromise the quality of like 2D support in Defold. So that's still like a super important type of game genre for us. So 3D support should not be added in conflict with any needs from 2D games. So we would like to just improve on 3D without compromising anything else, and especially also not like engine size. Oh yeah, and this was the thing, you probably saw it on the forum, one guy with a new like very nice sample project, like a full 3D pipeline with lights and shadows and global illumination and whatnot. You should really check out the showcase post on the forum and try the sample project that's included. It looks really great, and it's a nice step towards what we'd like to have natively or as some kind of template project in Defold itself, because we at the moment it's you have to be an expert to build something like this, but we'd like to make it a lot easier. We've also done the improved editor scripting, as I mentioned, and one new addition Vlad added fairly recently is the editor scene scripting, so that you can, using editor scripts, create any kind of, you can create collections, you can modify collections, you can create game objects and components and really manipulate the scene through scripts. So that opens up a lot of possibilities to more advanced tools together with the editor UI, and all of that is also scripted, of course, in Lua. So I think that's worth highlighting. There's a blog post that you can read up on and see some examples of how this is done. Obviously, like the next step would, of course, be to let you guys manipulate things in the scene. So adding your own gizmos and pop-ups when you interact with scene elements. So that's the next thing. We added some extensions. I mean, a lot of extensions nowadays are community created. The core team, we added the Photon real-time multiplayer networking solution, Android device performance framework, the Crazy Games SDK that we did just together with the launch of the Crazy Games Game Jam a while back. We've continued working on the Steam integration, now added a whole bunch of new network features, and we did the Xsola in-game store integration as well. And you should really go to defold.com/assets and check all of the community created integrations as well. There's a lot of very good high quality integrations and assets that you can use in your games. I would like to highlight the work we've done on editor usability. So we onboarded a new editor developer working part-time, Sprocket or Konstantinos. Sprocket on the forum, Konstantinos is his real name. He's mainly focused on usability in the editor, and since he started, we've seen a lot of very nice small quality of life improvements. I know Maxim is super happy to see some of these things. Some of them have been long time pain points for a lot of users, and it's really great to see that we are now shipping a lot of these kind of things in the editor, and this will continue next year as well, of course, and the rest of this year. All right, so that was the summary of some of the more recent things, and now let's take a quick look ahead. And this is on a very high level, and it will not cover all of the things we have planned, but performance first user experience, global reach, and 3D improvements. And by performance first, I will reiterate that we will never compromise on the performance of Defold. That's one of the key areas of Defold where we really stand out, where the engine is a lot smaller than competitors. Yes, you don't get all of the features that you get in Unity, but on the other hand, the engine is 1/10 of the size. Can run basically anywhere. Just like go to Poke.com on an old Android or iPhone and try to play some of the games, and you will see that. Try to play like Monkey Mart, and you see that it runs perfectly fine, even in the browser of an old phone. And that's really important for us. The engine should be small, and it should be performant even on low-spec devices. So with that in mind, we will work on like a continuous performance testing framework where we can catch problems early. We haven't really had that kind of structured performance testing in the engine itself. To be able to say that we can guarantee to not introduce these kind of regressions, we need this kind of automated testing and do like nightly builds where we do various kinds of performance tests and can spot problems early on. We will continue to optimize runtime memory usage, especially when running in a browser on a phone. You really need to be wary about like memory usage. So that's something we will pay attention to, and also build pipeline optimizations. like just in the last year, I don't have the exact numbers now, but probably reduced the build time of a large project. We've cut that down to a third or 25% maybe. It's a lot faster than it used to be. And as you guys evolve and build more advanced projects with more content, we need to make sure that you're not like blocked by long build times. So we're doing continuous improvements in that area, and we will continue to do so. We're also looking at like the first user experience, because we see, for instance, Asate mentioned the Unity runtime fee introduction, and we saw like a huge spike in users coming to Defold. Some of them were probably just curious or shopping around for a game engine, but some of them came and really, spent some time working on Defold, and some of them churned probably because there are too many rough edges. So we want to make sure that when the next huge spike in users arrive, that we're more ready and have a product that is easier for beginners to pick up. And it includes a lot of different things that we need to look at. Like when you launch the editor for the first time, how can we make sure that the developer, there's a very clear learning path for a developer to get started with Defold. When they come to the learn section of the website, what can we do to improve there? Do we have the right onboarding tutorials? Do we have all of the examples that developers are asking for? We usually get a lot of questions about like, how do I make a top-down shooter game? Then we can of course point to Asate Games and his tutorials, but how do I make a match 3 game, or pick any popular game genre? And we don't really have a lot of sample projects or starter projects that you can build from. And I think that's also one of the key areas where we need to spend time and money on building more. We can't just rely on Pavel and Asate Games and others to create the content. We also need to invest more ourselves. So that's an area we will focus a bit more on in the coming months. I would also like to say that we are very English-centric currently. If it works here in Europe or in the US, that's great. But there's a lot of users in other parts of the world. For instance, we know that GameMaker has a huge community in Brazil. And after talking to like the GameMaker guys themselves and some Brazilian studios, it's very obvious that a lot of Brazilian people will not use Defold because it's not localized. And similar, we have developers and studios in China, really asking that they'd like to be able to localize. And currently everything is hard-coded. We need to change that basically, and make sure that we can easily localize our tools to the areas where we have users. There's also things like engine file paths, if they contain non-standard, so to say, or like Chinese characters, it might fail. We don't have good UTF-8 support in Lua. There's also new platforms that we're not reaching at the moment. We have developers trying out YouTube playables, and there are some rough corners there. You can get stuff to run, but it's you have to do some changes. WeChat, for instance, it's a huge potential market we can't cover at the moment because they have a special setup with basically, it's a web game, but not really. You have to do some changes when it comes to how you get your canvas and how you play sounds and how you work with a virtual file system, that sort of thing. And also embedded systems, something that will only grow in popularity. So also something we need to look at. And something I don't have here on the slides, but it's also like being able to render text, like right to left, for instance. And we are very close to releasing a new text shaping API for Defold, where you can properly render text in basically any language and using any kind of font. That's also a way for us and for you guys to reach a new audience that may not be so familiar with English, for instance. We will continue to work on 3D improvements. We're only scratching the surface here, and I think we need good starter templates, or maybe even something in the built-ins folder, a better, easy-to-use render setup. Maybe one for low-end, one for high-end devices. GLTF, which is the format we support, we have made improvements, but it's still only scratching the surface. We should treat like GLTF files as containers for content, so we can bring in multiple root nodes. We can bring in the materials defined in the GLTF file and all of the other things as well, so that you can more easily just drop something in and work with it in Defold. Morph targets or blend shape animations, that's just one thing that's come up very recently, something we need. And then, of course, custom collision shapes, being able to, from a mesh or from the collision shape also use, or from the model itself use like a low quality load or something as the collision shape, and probably a lot more. Pavel mentioned this user pain point survey that we are doing. We have not compiled the results yet, it's still open, but there's probably going to be some points that we can pick and choose from there as well and focus on in the coming months. And that's it from me. If someone has a question, please go ahead and ask them. The messaging addressing URL ID system was the biggest friction point for me coming in. I still don't really understand how it works. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, we've built a lot around the fact that you work with messages and you use message passing. So not entirely sure how to simplify it, but if you have ideas, then please suggest them. I think we have a ticket on GitHub where this is discussed.
Yeah, I think my comments mostly around when you were talking about like onboarding and docs and reducing friction and stuff, you know, like I'm not saying you should change the system because it's obviously a core part of Defold, but it's so similar to other systems. It's similar to URL addressing, but it doesn't work the same way. It's similar to paths, but it doesn't work the same way. It's similar to the way that Godot nodes are addressed, but not quite the same. And since I'm familiar with all three of those things, I make assumptions about how messages should be addressed, and they're wrong, right? I think a lot of it comes down to the string hash confusion, because there's some really nice debugging stuff where, you know, you output IDs as strings, so you know what but they're not really strings, you know. And so there are things that you could do if they were strings, like concatenate them. You know, when you're building a path in Node, you can concatenate a folder and then put ... and you move up 2 steps, and then you concatenate a target, and you can do all that stuff and it's valid. But if you do all that stuff in Defold, it's obvious, well, it's in hindsight obviously not valid now for me, right? But it took quite a bit of friction for me to realize that.
I haven't looked at the survey results yet, or I've seen this mentioned, but I haven't seen if it's the biggest one. But yeah, I believe you're quite right. It's very hard to grasp for a beginner. So yeah, if it comes down to documentation or maybe adding some functionality to make it, like for instance, going up, like the hierarchy could be a thing, like parent going up to parent could be a thing. Yeah, we'll have to think about it, but I agree. It's hard to understand for a beginner. It's definitely not something that is easily digestible. You really have to spend some time with it to understand it. So
yeah, I might open an issue about just a path builder. That's the thing that I keep running into, is where I want, you know, I'm dynamically building levels and stuff. I'm dynamically injecting things into them, and I keep on wanting to reach for some sort of a thing that will let me build a path in the same way that I can in Node or Godot or whatever, where you concatenate segments, except it's not a string, so you don't concatenate segments, but you build segments somehow.
Someone mentioned offline documentation. Yeah, I mean, the documentation should, of course, be integrated with the editor. You can now at least get documentation in the code editor, so you can get like an expanded pop-up showing function description with arguments and that sort of thing. So that's available, but maybe we also need to integrate more of the documentation and maybe linking to stuff. So like when you have a sprite, maybe there should be a link to the sprite documentation and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's definitely for the onboarding for beginners.
By the way, thanks for your job. It's amazing. I use Defold for a lot of years. I always glad to update, to see your efforts. It's helped me a lot. So just thank you.
And thank you for creating all of the awesome extensions. I mean, it's nice with the smaller conferences, of course, where it becomes a bit more personal. I liked when DevGam was in Vilnius. I haven't been to any of the ones in Poland, Pavel, but so you probably have more experience there. It would also be nice to go and visit the what's it called, Games Gathering, I think. Comparing Gamescom and GDC, for instance, any day of the week, go to Gamescom. It's an absolutely massive conference compared to GDC. GDC is a lot smaller, but I suppose it's also because Gamescom is both consumer and business conference. So you have 3 halls with business exhibitors, you have one with just cosplay and manga stuff, you have one with peripherals, you have one or 2 maybe for the indies. So massive halls filled with indie developers showcasing their games. You have a big retro area, so if you're into like the old stuff like Commodore and Atari and all of those things and want to play like new games developed for those old computers, you should visit the retro area. And then you have like 4 huge halls for all of the consumer stuff. If you're in Europe, you should take the time to visit Gamescom at least once to get an appreciation of the size of the games industry. I was completely blown away the first time, so I can really recommend it. And then they have like the first 2 days is something called DevCom, which is like a mini GDC. The quality of the talks were quite good this year, so that's also worth probably visiting if you want more of the tech talks and that sort of thing, but don't have the money to go to the US and pay for a GDC ticket. GDC and DevCom have these online tickets, so if you're not able to join in person, you can join the streams, the presentations live, and then you have access to all of the recordings as well. And then after a while, like Pavel said, they're also shared on YouTube. Bye. Good luck on the game jam.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good luck, everyone.